Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I would like to welcome you to the third webinar in our Sphere Board Friday series, where today we'll be dealing with key risk indicators as it relates to your cybersecurity strategy. My name is George Nikonoroff, and I will be the moderator for today. During today's presentation, we encourage you to send us your questions on the topic, as they'll be answered sequentially at the end. Instructions are included in this slide. It's quick and easy to send questions, and we encourage you to send us your questions throughout the webinar, as well as after when we hit the question section. We have a great presentation and demonstration planned for you today, but before we jump into this topic, first up, I would like to introduce Brittany Pimpinella, Sales Associate for Sphere Technology Solutions. Brittany.
George, thank you. As mentioned, my name is Brittany Pimpinella. I would like to share with you an introduction to Sphere so that you will know who we are, what we do, and how we help our clients in achieving their security and compliance goals. So, who is Sphere Technology Solutions? Well, we call ourselves a cybersecurity company. We have built a niche focusing on protecting your sensitive data. We find it, we secure it, and provide all the mechanisms to manage data security long term. We actually work with the largest and most complex firms in the world, which has allowed us to grow over 600% over the last 4 years. We solve our clients' complex cybersecurity challenges by providing the analytics that measure risk, executing our remediation programs to reduce risk, and deploying automation solutions to effectively manage risk. Now, let's get into what we do. I want you to focus on the three inner circles: data, systems, and access. These circles represent a typical information technology landscape. First is the data. This is the information all companies create and use each day in the operation of their business. Next is systems. Systems can be on-premise, off-premise, or in the cloud. The most common scenario is a blend of all three. Last is access. Data and systems must be accessed by employees in order for them to perform their jobs. This access must consider the needs of a wide range of workers, including the frontline employee, the middle manager, all the way up to the C-suite. There are access requirements for non-employees, such as business partners, customers, and vendors. Access to data must consider the needs of each of these components. From an operational perspective, the task of managing these core components is extremely complicated. Now let's take a look at the outer circles: security, compliance, and governance. First is security. What are the threats an organization must defend against? Are these threats internal, external, or both? What we see at Sphere is a combination of all three. Today, the live demo of Sphere Board will show you in a mock environment where the threats are and the severity of those threats. Compliance. What are the regulations that apply to your industry, and how do you abide by these regulations? We are seeing not only is the regulation landscape becoming more stringent, but new regulations are constantly being passed. You may be familiar with the New York cybersecurity requirements and the EU GDPR. There are penalties if you fail to abide by these regulations. Today, Sphere Board will show you where you are most at risk and how to accurately measure and mitigate those risks. Lastly, governance. What is the target operating model for data, systems, and access? How does a target operating model enforce security, prove compliance, and how is this model maintained? At Sphere, we see with our customers the need to properly manage these components. It's actually becoming more important to the success of their business. Today's webinar will talk more about managing your key risk indicators and prioritizing what needs to be tackled first. Now, all right, let's answer the most common question we all get at Sphere. How do we do it? First, we collect and analyze the metadata from platforms, tools, and repositories in the target environment. This analysis enables Sphere to produce the key risk indicators which are necessary for establishing and maintaining the target operating model for your organization. Key risk indicators are created by applying business intelligence to the collected metadata. There are 3 layers to business intelligence: industry best practices, Sphere's best practices, and our customers' business intelligence. The key risk indicators can be leveraged in a multitude of ways. I want you to focus on the bottom of this presentation: assess, plan, remediate, and automate. An assessment. This provides visibility into the issues. This is a one-time snapshot into the health of your organization. We create a plan to remediate the identified risks. This will enhance the policies and procedures used to manage the target environment. Remediation. The key risk indicators now become very exciting, as the metrics that measure security and compliance will improve during the execution of the remediation plan. At the automation stage, the governance model is now in place. The organization can be managed by the key risk indicators, and risk mitigation becomes a business as usual activity. Here are several examples of the work we have done in 6 different organizations. You'll likely notice there are common themes among these customer success stories. Sphere delivering visibility to uncover and measure risk. Sphere understanding the identities, ownership, and use cases for data, systems, and access. And Sphere leveraging these metrics to make a positive impact for our clients. Now, I wish I had the time to go through each story, but later on, our speaker will talk about the work he has provided and successfully completed. We have 2 fantastic speakers for today's webinar. I'd like to first introduce Rosario Massagiacomo. Rosario is a director of architecture and design. He has over 20 years of experience and is the brains behind our Sphereboard solution. I know we all look forward to his live demo of Sphereboard later on. But first up is Jeremy Chung. Jeremy is a security engineer here at Sphere Technology Solutions and brings years of experience. He has worked on the execution and remediations for top financial service organizations and media companies. Jeremy will share with you the importance of key risk indicators and how they can be measured in different organizations. But before that, he will share a quick recap of our previous Sphereboard webinars. Jeremy, the floor is yours.
And good morning, everyone. And as Brittany mentioned, my name is Jeremy Chung. Before we dive into today's topic, let's do a quick recap of what we covered in our previous Sphereboard Friday webinars. We first showed you how Sphereboard is your window into your unstructured data, reporting high-level metrics on the security status of your environment and providing detailed reports on issues you may have. Next, we covered ownership, a key component of the remediation process. Here we covered the value of assigning owners to your business assets. And just a couple of weeks ago, we covered certification and entitlement, our automated solution for certifying owners and performing entitlement reviews on unstructured data. Now let's dive into today's topic. So what is our goal for today? We want to help everyone understand the risk profile and how to efficiently and effectively remediate as much of that risk as possible within the limitations of your team's time and resources. We'll be doing that by answering the following questions. What are key risk indicators and why do they matter to you? How much risk is in your environment? How do you reduce the most risk as fast as possible? Is my risk profile increasing or improving? And who owns that risk? Now, when I go to a new client for a remediation project, one of the first questions I always hear is, what do I remediate? Well, to answer that question, we can run reports from any of the third-party reporting tools they may have installed, from Varonis, Quest, SailPoint, or even our own Sphereboard, as we covered in the first of this webinar series. These reports can quantify problems in 3 very important ways. First, they can tell you what the types of issues are, things like open access on sensitive data or non-admin users with full control. Secondly, they'll tell you how many instances of those issues exist. So quantifying the types of issues into things like the number of folders, with open access or the number of users with full control. And lastly, they'll tell you where those issues exist, letting you know exactly which folder contains that open access or which non-admin user has those full control rights. So from these reports, you can go very in-depth into each issue. But when we circle back to the question of what do I remediate, the answer is, well, everything. Everything these reports produce is subject to remediation. At this point, if you had an infinite pool of time and resources, you would tackle everything, all of the issues all at once. But that's not a scenario we typically see. So you can't tackle everything, at least not at once. So the question goes from what do I remediate to what do I remediate first? In essence, how do I maximize my remediation efforts? The key is to prioritize your efforts and to prioritize based on your end goal, risk reduction. This way you get the most bang for your buck. Sounds great. How do I do that? To prioritize based on risk reduction, you have to be able to measure risk. This can be done using key risk indicators, or KRIs for short. KRIs can help you establish the answers to some of your big questions, like how much risk is in your environment, or what issues represent a high percentage of your total risk. That way we know what issues to tackle first. Great, these KRIs sound amazing, but what are they? Key risk indicators capture the risk associated to an issue. You can't quantify the risk of an issue just by knowing where it is or how much of it is out there. So the KRI ties the issue to the risk it represents. For example, let's say you ran a report on open access on sensitive data. This sensitive data could be social security information, HIPAA data, banking information, credit card information, etc. Well, I know what the issue is, I know where it is, and I know how much of it there is from my report, but what's the risk associated to it? Well, the risk is that anyone in the company can access the sensitive information and, without the proper controls in place, can share it out to anyone in the world. This would represent a high risk or a high risk KRI. Let's take another example, folders with excessive access. Here, a large, potentially unmanaged set of users can access seemingly secured data. Now, this isn't everyone in the company like open access, but it's still a large set. If I look at the permissions on a folder like this, it may look perfect, following all the proper standards on with a single read-only group and read-write group. But because an entitlement review policy hasn't been put in place or hasn't been enforced, an unintended large set of users have access to it. This would represent a medium risk or a medium risk KRI. The last example here is regarding folders with non-standard access. Non-standard refers to folders that have permissions that don't follow the standard policy put in place. This can make daily access management very costly and time-consuming. Let's say a user put in a request for read-only rights to a share. Seems simple. But if that share doesn't follow the permission standard and has 3 read-only groups instead of just 1, the IT admin won't know which of the 3 to add them to. If they add them to the wrong one, they could be providing access to potentially more than just that share if the group is used to permission other assets as well, whether they be other shares or applications. This would represent a lower risk KRI. Now that we understand KRIs, we can use them to measure risk. However, not all KRIs represent the same level of risk, so we can't just group them up as a single unit. As I mentioned, open access on sensitive data would be a high risk compared to non-standard's lower risk. Each company is also going to have different KRIs and different risks on each KRI based on the company's tolerances and regulatory constraints. Each company will also have to consider their operational risks, their reputational risks, and of course, the financial risks that they have. What's great about Sphereboard is that we can take all of your specific KRIs, considering all of your risks, and create a risk profile, essentially boiling down your risk into a single sortable number. Guys, this is huge. This means you'll spend less time running and interpreting reports and more time taking action on the things that will reduce the most risk the fastest, because you can now prioritize. You can literally sort on your risk. With this, we can answer the question, what do I remediate first? That sounds awesome, but what else can my risk profile tell me? Well, you can see the total risk in your environment. You can drill down to see where your risk is. And with the certification review that we covered last time, you will know who owns this risk, so you know who to go to if there's ever a problem. Then comes the question of, how am I doing? Is my environment getting worse or better? Well, we've also built in trending to measure your progress in your remediation efforts. Here you can see if your remediation efforts are actually reducing your overall risk. You can also see if the risk is increasing, and if so, is it slowly over time or is it a sudden jump? And you can see where this change is occurring in your environment so you know where to tackle. All right, I know you're dying to see it, so I'll pass it off to our Director of Architecture and Design for Sphereboard. Rosario?
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. So we're going to jump right into the demo. If you haven't attended any of the other webinars, we go much more in depth, especially with the first one, on all the elements of Sphereboard and all the features. I would strongly recommend that you look at those or listen to those webinars, or you can contact us and we can certainly set up a live demo for you. So I'm going to cover a couple of things here. I'm going to skip over a couple of things. Again, I really want to focus on two things, talking about the key risk indicators, as Jeremy was discussing, and really answering that question, what do I remediate first? So the first thing I want to show is our inventory card. I always start with the inventory card. Here we're looking at this organization, and we're seeing the amount of data assets that this organization has, broken down by region in this case. And one thing I want to highlight is New York seems to be where possibly the headquarters is. It has the most data. And in this instance, we're looking at files and folders. So let's scroll down and let's start looking at some of these KRIs. So in our security card, this is really where we quantify the security issues, some of the security issues that Jeremy was talking about. So we have open access, excessive access, non-standard access, and inappropriate. These are some of our basic security issues that we report on when it comes to file shares and filers. And again, we're looking at this across the environment, broken down by these business units, and you can see that APAC happens to have a lot of issues, UK has the most issues, and New York, that headquarters again seems to have a good amount of issues. So as we scroll down, we then get to the sensitive data card, and this card is one that a lot of people are, especially security people, love, because here we're quantifying the amount of sensitive data that's unprotected. And again, this is another really important KRI, because you're going to have sensitive data in your organization. But the question is that sensitive data open, and is there excessive access? Is there any of the other security issues associated with that sensitive data? And as we can see here, for example, again, picking on New York, 40% of all the data in New York, all the sensitive data in New York, is currently unprotected or has some security issue. This becomes very important when we start thinking about risk. So again, we then have some additional KRIs, and in other instances, we've built other metrics that are important for a specific client or industry. But finally, we get to this card, the risk rating card. The risk rating is a culmination of everything that we've looked at up until now, from inventory data, from location of the owners of the data, the security issues, what industry they're in, how much sensitive data they have versus how much unprotected sensitive data the customer has. All of that baked into a single number that answers that simple question, what do I tackle first? So looking at this, you could clearly see that the New York region, which again happens to be the headquarters, which had a large number of security issues, which had a large amount of unsecure sensitive data, happens to have the highest risk. Now, one thing I want to highlight here is that while New York has the highest risk rating, you'll notice that it actually didn't have the most security issues. And that, going back to what Jeremy was talking about, it's not just about the security issues. There's a lot that goes into developing that risk rating. Because when you're just comparing security issues, well, so I have 10,000 instances of excessive access and 5,000 instances of open access between two different regions, what do I tackle first? So what we do, and the way that we recommend customers approach that question, is really you take that information, you enhance that information with other KRIs, with other valuable, important information about how you manage your organization, what industry you're in, and bake that down into a single risk rating. And this is how we do it, and this is how we engage with our customers and solve their issues. So now, great, so I know I need to work on the New York region. Well, okay, well, what do I do first in the New York region? The New York region was the biggest region. So that's where we start going down into the details. So we're gonna click into the New York region in Sphereboard, and now we see all the shares that are in the New York region, and we see other metrics like who the owner is, the amount of folders, the total amount of open folders. But notice that last column. That's the key column right there. If we were to go in and sort by that column, we could then sort the highest risk data asset to the lowest risk. So we sorted by risk rating. So now, as an engineer, as someone that needs to remediate these issues, I know exactly what to tackle first. By starting with the highest risk rating items and working my way down, I quickly begin to remediate and decrease the amount of risk in the organization. Now that remediation involves, resolving open access issues, excessive access issues, not standard issues, but resolving those issues that Sphereboard shows in the previous screen I showed will bring down the risk rating of that individual data asset, which then rolls up into the overall risk for that business unit or region, which then rolls up into the overall risk for the entire organization. So great, now I know exactly what to remediate first. I'm gonna work my way down. I'm gonna have my security engineers, my infrastructure people start tackling these issues. How do I know that it's working? And that's where what Jeremy was talking about, where we talking about history and trending. In our history and trending analysis, what we're telling you is this is how things are going. Things are getting better, things are getting worse. We give you a trend line that tells you, look, if you don't resolve these issues, they're just gonna continue to get worse, or because you're working on this, things are getting better. So I wanna go ahead and jump to the New York region. Again, in this mock organization, maybe we've already started some of the remediation programs, and you can see that the trend line is actually green, not red. So we are tackling these issues. Things are getting better, and the overall risk for the organization the risk posture for the organization is improving. So this is how we tackle remediations, and really everything that we've talked about leading up to this final webinar is getting to this point. The idea is that we're in the first we're reporting on the issues and finding the issues, then we're finding owners, then we're finally getting the owners to tell us it's okay to fix the things that we want to fix. And finally, here is the most exciting part. We're actually fixing issues. We're actually decreasing risk. We're improving the security of the firm as a whole. So what I want to do now is I want to hand it back to Jeremy, who's actually going to talk about a few examples of where he's used Sphereboard with real life customers. Jeremy?
Yeah, thanks, Rosario. Guys, this is huge. Let me give you a few examples. At my most recent client, we were asked to remediate 3.5 million folders containing open sensitive data. Now, this was about 30% of their 12 million folders with open sensitive data problem. To give you some perspective, this is a very large company. So there were about 850 million folders in their entire environment. In this project, we were able to lock down 3.5 million folders, but with the risk rating prioritization that we had in Sphereboard, we were able to reduce the risk not by the 30%, but by over 55%. So for 30% of the work effort, we remediated over 55% of the risk problem. At another client, they had a bunch of reports showing what, where, and how many issues that they had. In this case, it was for open access, stale data, non-standard access, and excessive access. But they didn't know what to tackle first, and they were having a hard time coming up with a simple view of their total risk to present to upper management, the C-suite. So they utilized SphereBoard to create this simple, high-level view. The analysis showed that by tackling 25% of the highest risk areas, they could remediate over 50% of their overall risk. We then helped their IT team tackle that 25%. And the amazing part was you could see every month the total risk of their environment was going down significantly.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you very much, Rosario, for that great presentation. It is appreciated. I'd like to remind everybody to please feel free to send us your questions by using the questions tab in the dialog box in the right-hand corner. We do have some questions coming in. And the first question centers around key risk indicators. So this attendee is asking, what are some of the other KRIs besides security issues that are taken into account when determining risk? Who would like to go first?
I could talk about that one. So as I said, and I showed in the demo, I showed the security issues, and then I said, all that gets baked into a final risk rating, but there are other elements, and those elements really depend on the organization and depends on the industry. As an example, if we're dealing with a financial organization, you might have ethical law violations, right? So if you have a situation where you have buy side and sell side, and they have access to the same data, obviously that's something that would really raise the risk rating because you need to take care of that immediately. If it's a health organization, you might have HIPAA rule violations that will immediately raise the risk rating beyond just open access. It's layering that open access with, you have open access to patient information. So obviously you have to bump up that risk rating. So really these types of things are the things that add that extra layer of elements. And Jeremy, do you have some examples?
Yeah, actually, one of my recent clients, we were asked to remediate across a bunch of different regions across the world. We noticed that in different regions, especially in the the EMEA region, so there were a few specific countries within that region that had different regulatory constraints than they had in the US. So those had to be taken into account when doing the risk rating because their regulatory constraints in those regions were a little bit different than the US ones. They had a few more refined rules that we had to put in.
Interesting. Okay, so we got another question coming in that focuses on the automation aspect. So the question is, are remediations automated? Jeremy, that seems like a very interesting, if not plain question.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on that?
So this is something that we've actually explored. As you've noticed before with our previous webinars, each step of the process is quite automated, from the reporting aspect, the finding owners and confirming aspect, as well as the entitlement review process. The problem with remediations is it's the last step. It actually deals with users' access to data, right? If there are any hiccups in that process in any way, that can cause a significant impact to the business. So we've actually left the remediation part unautomated. It is a manual process, but all of the pre-steps are automated in order to move that forward as fast as you can. This mitigates the potential issues that can come up within remediations.
Interesting perspective on that. So we got another question that came in, and I think this is pretty much suited for the two of you. We're getting close to time. I urge anybody who has any questions to please send them in. How do you quantify a successful remediation program? So I think both of you might have some perspective on that, right?
Yeah, so really the bottom line is reducing risk to the organization. And that's not just, seeing a number on the screen. It's actually understanding that we've actually improved the risk or decreased the risk for that organization. That at the end of the day, that's the main goal. And what we try to do with SphereBoard is give the customer that view, that final number, that risk rating that represents this is what's going on in your organization. Things are going really bad, or things are going better, or things are going great, right? But ultimately, you want to monitor that risk rating, and you want to see that number going down. because we baked all those things into, some of the things that Jeremy was talking about, and the security issues and the regulatory things, we baked that all into the number. The idea is getting that number down to 0. Now, it may never be 0, but you want to get as close to 0 as you can.
Yeah, with each company, each client that I go to for these projects, everyone wants their quantification of how you're doing a little bit differently. Some may want to measure it based on the number of issues you reduce. Some may want to measure it in a different way. But what is great about this risk reduction number, our risk rating that we have, is it's kind of unanimous across all companies. We've boiled it down to what they believe is important. And seeing that number go down is the ultimate, my environment is getting better.
Okay, very interesting. So we have time for one final quick question, and Jeremy, I'm going to throw it to you. How are risk ratings determined? Do you use predetermined rules, or can I create my own rules? And, we talk about a variety of different ways. So if you can give a final quick answer.
Sure.
Wrap up.
So risk ratings, there are a few things that we've pre-baked in. So there are a few security issues that we already know that almost every company has, and we've associated a risk to each of those. If your company, and it most likely does, has any additional rules on top of that, we actually work with you to add those rules in for the risk rating. So any additional regulatory constraints that your company may have, any additional operational risks that you have to consider, we make sure to work with you to consider those in the risk rating. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a true view of your risk.
Great answer. All right, with that said, that is the end of the questions. I'd like to thank Rosario Mastrogiacomo, Director of Architecture and Design, and Jeremy Chung, our Systems Engineer and our KRI expert. A replay of this webinar will be posted on our website at www.sphereco.com. Again, that's www.sphereco.com. Thank you very much, and I hope all of you have a great weekend. Bye for now.